Hello, AP Psychology students. Welcome to the classroom. You might recognize the whiteboard behind me and the little map hanging up over there. So I'm coming to you today to talk about social and cognitive learning. Number one was classical conditioning. Hopefully you remember that. Number two was operant conditioning. And number three is social and cognitive learning. Social and cognitive learning was a big challenge to the prevailing view of psychologists at the time, from the 1920s to the 1960s, when behaviorism really dominated psychology. In fact, behaviorism and Skinnerian approach are pretty much synonymous because Skinner was really the person who came up with a lot of the terminology and the methodology behind behaviorism, which is really important, don't get me wrong, but it's not the only way that we learn. And so we're going to look at a couple of other types of learning here that did directly challenge Skinner's approach. The first one is called latent learning. Now, latent learning refers to learning that becomes evident only when there is an incentive to demonstrate it. So let's say you are studying, you're reading your textbook, and the learning is not evident until you take a test or do something that demonstrates that you have learned that information. Certainly, we know that learning occurs when we are not, even when we're not being reinforced for something, but this particular study was something that demonstrated at a time when Skinner and his ideas were dominant. So if we take a look at the groups here, we have a rat running a maze. In the experiment, there were three groups. There was one group that got no food or reinforcement during any of the trials of running the maze. We have another group that got food after every trial running the maze, and you can see that the number of errors that were made by the rat as they went through the maze decreased with each day. And then we have this third group, which is kind of interesting. They made a lot of errors at first. They got a little bit better, and then they got a reinforcement on day 11. And then they performed even better than the group that had gotten a reinforcement every day. So what does this show us? First of all, it does show us that these rats did indeed learn without reinforcement. That might seem pretty intuitive to all of us, but at that time and that stage in the discipline of psychology, this was really challenging the status quo. Now, what we believe that those rats made, and actually has been demonstrated on fMRIs and other kinds of recordings of rat brains, believe it or not, is that they created a cognitive map. They knew without looking where to go, where in the maze to go as quickly as possible to get their food. Another type of learning is demonstrated in this video that we're going to watch here, and this is a crow solving a problem of how to get food out of the bottom of a tube. Oh, wrong video. This is a video of the pigeon actually trying to reach a banana. Now, the pigeon has no experience with bananas. I didn't even know pigeons liked bananas. What this does is it replicates a study that was done by a man named Kohler, who worked with chimpanzees out on the island of Tenerife on the west coast of Africa. So the pigeon has its wings clipped. That means it can't fly, and it's trying to reach the banana. Now, clearly, shaping is not happening. There's nobody giving the pigeon food in the little hopper you can see on the back of the device that he's in. And so he just has to figure out how to get to the banana by himself. So let's see what he does. Okay, so there we go. He figured it out without reinforcement. And he also figured it out just through working through it and suddenly coming up with a response. So, as I said, this whole thing is a work in progress. So if you see some unusual things like backgrounds or whatever, just try to ignore them. This is called insight learning. Here is the chimpanzee, whose name is Sultan. And Sultan was given a banana on the ceiling of this tent that he lived in, and there were boxes and crates stacked around the tent that he lived in. Um, he wanted the banana, just like we saw with the pigeon, but had not been given any instructions on how to reach the banana. And so, after a period of time, Sultan suddenly figured out how to stack boxes in order to reach the banana. The same thing came when a banana was outside of his cage. There were actually bars like over here, and he had some sticks that he could put together, and he figured out how to make a tool that would pull the banana inside of the cage. Now, insight learning occurs anytime that you're thinking about a problem and you're trying to figure out the solution, and then you suddenly go, aha, I got it. It's that aha moment. It's something that just comes to you suddenly. Now, what I really want to get to today is something that I think is really, really important when we think about learning. If you think about the really important lessons that you've learned about in life, the things that you've learned about love and community and um, kindness and benevolence, those really are not the kind of lessons you learn necessarily through reinforcement and punishment or through classical conditioning. So I want you to think about, if you would, for a second, one person that has influenced your life in some way. What did you learn from them, and how did you learn it? Now, when I first did this, I had to choose a relative, a friend, and a teacher. And I looked up the teacher that I thought about, and his name was Marv Dennett. He was a professor of mine at the University of Minnesota in industrial organizational psychology. As you can see from his smile, he was just such a pleasant and warm man. And every time I showed up to his class, I knew I was going to learn something. I was so excited to learn from him. Not only did I learn a great deal of information that would help me get my job as a vocational counselor with the Department of Labor, but I also learned a real love for teaching because he really had a passion for teaching. So if you think about that person, how did you learn what you learned from them? So that brings us to what we call social observational learning. The man's name who's associated most with social observational learning is this man right here. His name is Albert Bandura. Albert Bandura was concerned about media and how media might affect children's behavior. His work began in the 1960s when there were a lot of shows coming out about cops and robbers or cowboys and Indians, and we see gun violence on TV for the first time. And he wanted to know how this would affect the behavior of children. In fact, do people imitate what they see on the screen? Now, there have been numerous dozens, probably hundreds of studies on the effect of media on development, on violence, etc. But this is the study that we need to know for this class, and it did have some timeless findings, and we'll see those in just a minute. So his key question of interest was, does violent media cause aggressive behavior? What he did was he took a group of children and he had a control group that was just in a room with toys, and they were just in the first part of the study. Children in another group watched an adult abuse a bubble doll, for example, by slamming it, by yelling at it, by kicking it around the room, etc. And then the other group, the other experimental group, watched an adult play with secret toys and nonviolent toys, nonviolent actions against the Bobo doll, which was one of those dolls, that you blow up and you punch down and they pop up. And actually, they're really fun. I actually really loved mine when I was a kid. Nevertheless, what we're looking for is imitative behavior. So Albert Bandura filmed his participants, and this is the adult model here, and we're going to watch a film of this in just a moment. This is one of the boys that he filmed, and this is one of the girls that he filmed. So let's take a look at what happened in these particular examples. Okay, so what do we learn from this? We learned a couple of things, and I have to hurry here because I have a limited amount of time left on this particular video. Children did initiate imitative behaviors of modeled aggression. We can see if you look at that chart that boys, if they saw a model being rewarded or punished for behavior, were more likely to have what we call vicarious conditioning occur. So as you can see here, if the model was punished, this was one of the other variations of the test, then the girls were far less likely to imitate behaviors. The film's going to run out in 5 seconds. There will be a part 2, and it won't be very long.